They say Genghis Khan conquered the world with horses, bows, and fire, but the truth is far stranger and far more powerful. Empires don't survive on victory alone. Steel can take land, but only systems can hold it. And behind the largest land empire in human history was something unexpected. A tax system so efficient, so flexible, so radically fair for its time that it turned nomadic warriors into the wealthiest superpower the world had ever seen. This is the story of how Genghis Khan built an economic engine, one that reshaped Eurasia, rewired trade, and made the Mongol Empire richer than Rome, richer than China, richer than any kingdom of its age. And he did it not through cruelty, but through a brutal kind of logic. Reward those who produce, punish those who exploit, and keep the arteries of empire, trade, tribute, and talent flowing without interruption. But to understand how a man born in a freezing steppe hut became the architect of the world's most profitable empire, we must begin with the world he inherited. Before Genghis Khan rose, the steppe tribes lived in a cycle of poverty, raiding, and revenge. There were no cities, no tax collectors. Wealth was measured in animals, not coins. But Temujin, long before he became Genghis Khan, watched his family starve after his father's death. He saw tribal chiefs hoard power while ordinary clans suffered, and he learned a truth that shaped his entire economic worldview. A system that steals from the weak eventually destroys itself. When he united the tribes, he did something unheard of. He didn't reward the noble families. He rewarded the poor warriors who had followed him when he had nothing. Loyalty, not lineage, became the basis of wealth, and that single principle became the seed of the Mongol tax machine. The first transformation was simple: outlaw corruption. In a world drowning in bribery, Genghis Khan created a rule so harsh it terrified even his generals. Any official caught embezzling, taking bribes, or misreporting taxes would be executed. Not fined, not jailed, executed. And because Mongol law applied to everyone, even the sons of generals, corruption plummeted to levels no medieval empire could match. For the first time, merchants and farmers under Mongol rule didn't fear tax collectors. They feared breaking the law. And so they produced more, traded more, built more. But fairness alone didn't build wealth. Genghis Khan introduced something far more radical: a universal tax code. Different lands had different customs: China, Persia, the Russian principalities, Central Asian caravan cities. Instead of crushing them under Mongol rule, he did the opposite. He standardized, simplified, and optimized. The core rule was elegant. If you produce food, pay a share of grain or livestock. If you wage trade, pay a percentage of your profits. If you serve the empire, soldier, messenger, craftsman, pay nothing. This turned the Mongol Empire into a machine where the most productive were protected and the most valuable were rewarded. It was not equal, it was not democratic, but it was efficient, astonishingly efficient. Then came the most daring economic experiment of all: protection of merchants. In medieval societies, merchants were parasites in the eyes of nobles. In the Mongol Empire, they became the lifeblood of civilization. Genghis Khan declared that any merchant traveling with a Mongol passport, a paisa, was under the protection of the Khan himself. No soldier could touch them, no official could tax them extra, no city could deny them entry. And suddenly, a world that had been carved into dozens of isolated trade zones became a single economic network. From the Pacific to the Mediterranean, merchants traveled in safety unmatched for centuries. The Mongols did not merely tolerate trade, they subsidized it. They loaned money to merchants, they sent military escorts, they guaranteed repayments, they even compensated merchants for losses due to bandits or storms. This wasn't generosity, it was strategy. Every caravan, every shipment, every deal created wealth that flowed into Mongol hands through market taxes, border fees, and tribute systems. And as wealth increased, so did stability. But Genghis Khan saw something deeper. An empire survives not by taxing the present, but by investing in the future. And so he built one of the greatest communication networks the world had ever seen, the Yam, a chain of relay stations stretching thousands of miles across Asia. At each station, fresh horses, food, shelter, and supplies awaited imperial messengers. Information that once took months traveled in days. Orders moved instantly. Taxes flowed with precision, and because the empire was connected, wealth could be extracted with minimal force. The Yam was more than infrastructure, it was the circulatory system of empire. And like any good strategist, Genghis Khan ensured the system paid for itself. Local communities were required to support their nearest station with supplies, but in return, they received protection, trade connections, and legal guarantees, a fair exchange enforced with iron discipline. And so the Mongol tax system expanded, not by crushing people, but by binding them into a network where everyone, willingly or not, contributed to the prosperity of the whole. But conquest brings diversity, and diversity brings problems. In Central Asia, tax farmers, private collectors, had long exploited the poor. The Mongols abolished them. In Persia, aristocrats hid wealth through complex land deals. The Mongols outlawed them. In Russia, local princes played games with tribute payments. The Mongols forced them to deliver exact amounts on strict schedules. Every region was different, but the Mongol solution was always the same: transparency, enforcement, and brutal simplicity. And yet, the genius of the Mongol tax machine wasn't how it punished, but how it rewarded. Craftsmen captured in war were not enslaved, they were paid. Scholars were recruited, doctors were sheltered, blacksmiths were honored. Every skilled worker, regardless of origin, became a resource to be protected, not exploited. That single idea made the Mongols wealthier than any empire. Talent was more valuable than gold. But the greatest innovation, and the most surprising, lay in how the Mongols treated religion. While European kingdoms taxed churches heavily, the Mongols did something shocking. They exempted all religious institutions from taxation. Why? Because priests, monks, mullahs, and shamans were the influencers of their age. Win the support of the holy men, and you win the hearts of the people. The Mongols didn't believe in religious freedom, they believed in strategic tolerance, and it worked. Cities resisted less, scholars cooperated more, tribute systems stabilized. As the empire expanded, so did its economy. Gold poured in from conquered cities, silk and spices crossed the steppe in massive caravans. Slaves, if skilled, were freed and integrated. Land was measured, counted, taxed, and governed. The Mongol Empire became rich, unimaginably rich. But it wasn't the wealth that made the system extraordinary, it was something deeper: order. Before Genghis Khan, the Silk Road was a fractured, dangerous labyrinth. Under Mongol rule, it became the safest highway the world had ever known. A merchant could travel from Venice to Beijing without changing legal systems, without dodging bandits, without paying endless bribes at every border. That level of stability has only been matched in the modern era, and yet the Mongols achieved it in the 13th century. But every system has a flaw. And the Mongol flaw was the very thing that made them powerful: decentralization. While Genghis Khan lived, his sons and generals enforced the system with absolute loyalty. But after his death, the empire fractured. The tax code diverged, local rulers grew greedy, tribute payments became unpredictable. Corruption, once punishable by death, crept back into the system. The arteries of empire thickened, clogged, and finally broke. Trade slowed, the yams fell into disrepair. The fair, efficient tax machine that had powered the Mongol world began to collapse, and with it, the empire that once ruled from Korea to Hungary dissolved into dust and legend. But even in ruin, the Mongol system left fingerprints in history. Russia's census, taxation, and administrative structures trace back to Mongol roots. China's yuan reforms influenced later dynasties. The Silk Road's revival inspired global trade centuries later. The Mongol Empire showed the world a truth that still holds: Wealth is not created by force alone. It is created by systems, fair, predictable, enforced, and built on the belief that prosperity depends on the movement of goods, people, and ideas. Genghis Khan understood this better than any ruler of his age. He did not simply conquer land, he conquered inefficiency, he conquered corruption, he conquered isolation, and in doing so, he built the richest empire on earth, not by accident, but by design. His tax system was not just a source of revenue, it was the backbone of an empire, the engine of a world, and the reason a boy from the freezing steppes became the master of continents. The swords of the Mongols built an empire, but their tax system sustained it. And in the end, it wasn't war that made Genghis Khan unforgettable. It was the system he left behind, a system that outlived him, shaped nations, and revealed a timeless lesson. Prosperity is not born from conquest. It is born from order, from fairness, from the simple, brutal logic that a world connected is a world enriched. Genghis Khan understood this. The question is,